The night the lock told everything. I have always believed that a home eventually comes to resemble the one who loves it most. Our apartment had my way of standing, the cups with the opening towards the light, the shoes in small diagonals under the bench, the window ajar so that the city could breathe through us at night. And yet it was not me who discovered the break first, it was the lock. My name is Emil. I roast coffee for people who believe that every morning deserves a new beginning. My girlfriend Sophie is an emergency nurse. She came home with hands that smelled of alcohol and soap and often sat in the kitchen without turning on the light, letting my voice find her, letting me pour a cup as if the heat could turn the world upside down. We had known each other for many years. I knew the pace of her breathing when the factory light hit her from the emergency room, and I knew the way she put her face in my neck when she was too late and too late to speak. It didn't start with a message, but with a receipt. My smart lock system sent a standard email, door open 2:13 a.m. guest access. I hadn't shared any code. I sat there for a long time anyway, looking at the email as if the words would change just because I was starring. I figured it must be a bug in the app, things like that happen, but the very next night the same message came at almost the same time. I wrote to support. They kindly replied that everything was working as it should. If it's not you, it said, someone has gained access. Sophie often worked the night shift, so I said nothing. Instead, I put my ear back to our little life and listened for the difference. It came like a scent I couldn't place, a wet green note that crept under her soap, bergamot, cypress. It came as a new habit. She put her phone on Do Not Disturb, placed it on the back of the sofa instead of on the table, like you would put an animal you don't trust but still want nearby. And it came as a laugh that stayed in her throat longer when she talked about her work. One evening I said, "Who can make your lip twitch like that?" She kissed me gently on the cheek, slipped her hand under my t-shirt, said, "You and your ability to hear gaps." I let myself fall into that touch as if into a lake I knew, but I could feel the current. I roast coffee with my nose. It teaches you to see with your eyes closed. That's why it was my nose that stopped me in the bedroom early one morning when she was sleeping soundly after a shift. On her nightgown was a residue of something that wasn't my scent. Not perfume, but a bodily trace left behind, the faint shadow of another soap, a different pH if you want to be technical. I didn't move, but one sentence stuck so clearly in my mind that I almost said it out loud. Someone has been close to you who isn't me. I decided to turn on the light very slowly, not by tearing the curtain apart but by turning the knob. So I noted when she said late shift when the lock opened when she came home feeling confident. I noticed that her stockings suddenly had a different elastic, that her hair was gathered into a knot she hadn't done before, that there was a white cup on our balcony with a thin gold line that wasn't one of mine. I'm not jealous by nature, I'm just thorough. One night I decided to stay home, even though she thought I was at the roastery until late in the morning. I turned everything off, sat in the dark with my feet on the cool floor and waited. The lock gave way with a little click, the sound I love because it has always meant here comes someone who knows my name. The door opened slowly and a shadow slid in. Sophie whispered, "Just one glass of water and you're off again," and I realized she wasn't talking to me. I didn't get up. I heard two pairs of breaths, the second deeper, calmer, with a rhythm of someone who's used to being heard. A hand hit the wall, a muffled laugh. The water ran in the kitchen, then "See you" from a voice I didn't recognize but which carried a name in its sound, Thomas. The door closed again, and then I turned on the light. Sophie stood with the glass in her hand. She looked like she'd been in a snapshot, loose blouse, hair in a new bun, skin damp from night and haste. We looked at each other for a long time. "I thought you were at the roastery," she said. I didn't answer. I went over to her, took the glass, set it on the table, let my hand rest on her hip. "Do you want to lie now or do you want to sit down?" I asked quietly. She sank as if words could do that to a person. "I want to sit," she said. We sat down on the floor next to the cupboard. She rested her forehead against my knees. I put my hand on the back of her neck. She started to tell me before I asked. "He's the head doctor on my ward. His name is Thomas. It started with a shift when everything went wrong and he stood in the door and said nothing, just was there." She laughed dryly. "I fell in love with someone holding my back while I held someone else. And now," I asked. She exhaled. "Now I've taken him home for a glass of water as if it were natural." She lifted her face, her eyes gleaming. "I love you, Emil, you know that, and yet," I nodded. "Do you love him?" She closed her eyes and said, "I love the way I stay calm with him. It's not the same, but it's not nothing either." I could have chosen the scene. I could have shouted, asked for phones, thrown cups, written messages to everyone who matters. Instead, I took her hand. "I want truth in our kitchen," I said. "Truth is ugly at first, but it's strong." She nodded. "What do we do?" she asked. We stop letting the lock be the only thing that says anything, I said. The next day I wrote to Thomas. I found his email through the department's contact list, wrote with my hands still, "You were at my home last night. It's not a threat, it's an invitation. Meet me at my roastery tomorrow after hours. We'll have a cup, we'll talk like men who don't play deaf." He quickly replied, "I'll come." He was the kind of handsome man who was all about calm, not angles. He had hands that were used to carrying bodily weight. When I set a cup in front of him, he placed his palm on it as if to feel its pulse. "I'm not proud," he said before I could open my mouth. "That's good," I said. "Pride never saved anyone." He looked me in the eye. "She told me she loved you." "She told me that too," I replied, "and that she's calm with you." He nodded. "I'm not going to sneak up on me anymore," he said. "If I'm going to be in her life, I'm going to be in daylight." "I want to be," I said, "but you should know that my daylight is not a place where I share without choosing it." He smiled sadly. "So we have to choose?" "Yes," I said, "and until we choose, neither of us will touch the locks." Sophie moved in with her friend for a few nights. We didn't write long messages, we wrote short truths. Slept, ate, cried a little, went for a walk. I set the table for someone in the kitchen and found that I had enough words to fill the room without speaking out loud. On the third day, she stood in the doorway in the dusty afternoon light and said, "Can I come in?" "Yes," I said, and it was the most honest yes in a long time. We made pasta. We talked about all the things you forget to say when you're just going through each other's calendars. The way she always buckles her left shoulder when she's scared, the way I go mute if I'm happy, how we've let our bodies go on autopilot to save time. Later she took my hand, placed it on her chest, placed her other hand on top. "Here if you want to hear where I am," she said. Her heartbeat was not calm, it was fast. I kissed her palms. "You're here," I said. We decided to build a scene where anything could be true. Not a trap, not a humiliation. An evening at my place in the roastery where we invited Thomas and Freja. I didn't know her yet, I only knew she existed because one evening when Thomas picked up Sophie after a shift, he had mentioned an appointment at home. I asked directly over our coffee, "Are you alone?" He shook his head. "I have a girlfriend, her name is Freja, and she deserves more than half a candle." "Then take her with you," I said. Freja came in a green dress that looked as if it had fallen into her life from another time. She had strong eyebrows and a way of standing that said she wouldn't run away, but she wouldn't stay either if someone asked her to forget herself. I poured wine, grinded beans in batches, let the warm scent bridge the gap while we were still clumsy with words. I had prepared a small tasting, 3 cups. "The first one I call Night Shift," I said. "It's dark, carries and holds." I handed it to Sophie. "The second one is called Liver Ick. It stings a little on the tongue, but it cleanses." I gave it to Freja. "And the last one is called Bliver. It's simple, not boring, just what it says." I poured it to Thomas and me. It could have been embarrassing. There was silence. Sophie held her cup with both hands and looked at me as if I were standing away from her and yet right next to her. Thomas sat up straight as if he had learned to respond warmly to difficult messages. Freja took a sip, set down her cup and said, "I want to hear what we do now without either of us making ourselves look small." I liked her instinctively. "I want that too," I said. "So, this is not a court of law, it is a workshop. I propose that we put our wishes on the table, not as demands but as truths. I can begin." I told her that I wanted a life where I didn't have to ask the lock if I was worth staying with, that I wanted Sophie to have doubts, that doubt shouldn't live in darkness, that I wanted my body to be loved for what it is, not for the piece it can imitate. Freja spoke up. She didn't want to be the woman behind the scenes, she wanted to be the narrator in her own house. Thomas wouldn't hide behind people's lives when his own decision was the only one missing. Sophie wanted, she said, to be someone who could carry 2 truths without betraying anyone, that she loved me and that she had settled down with another person. "That sounds like a circle that can't be drawn," I said, "but we can try to see if it can at least stand." We decided on a month's break, not as punishment but as space. Thomas moved in temporarily with a friend. Sophie lived with Freja for the first few weeks, not as lovers but as people who shared a kitchen and silence. I lived in our apartment with the windows open, and we wrote to each other short things, gentle things. Freja and I started going for walks after her work. We talked about the strangeness of getting to know each other in an after-party where the music is still hot. Some evenings Freja and I were silent all the way around the lake. Other evenings we took turns telling our little stories. I told her about my father, who cried the first time I baked a loaf of bread that reminded him of his mother. She told me about the gardener she once loved, who taught her that rose bushes are little lessons in holding on and letting go. There was an evening when the rain was so fine that it lay like glass on our hair, and Freja stopped under a chestnut tree, looked at me for a long time and said, "Do you want me to take your hand?" Yes, I said, it was neither a kiss nor the start of anything that anyone could define. It was just a hand in mine. Sophie wrote after 2 weeks, I want to see you, not to explain, to be together. I asked her to come one afternoon when the roastery was closed. I put cushions on the floor, put on a soft record, not jazz, not pop, just something that would fit. She stepped in, took off her shoes without looking at me, put them down so carefully that I understood how afraid she was of making a mistake. I walked over to her, put my forehead against hers. Neither of us said sorry. We didn't say forgive. We said with our breaths, I can be here. We kissed, at first gently, like testing the heat of new water, then deeper, like finally reaching for an object you've wanted but have been putting off for so long. I let my fingers search for the places on her back that can always draw me back to us. She answered with that old, uneven rhythm where she prays and holds back at the same time. We didn't undress to forget. We did it slowly because we wanted to see. When she sat astride me on the floor, she put her forehead against mine again, and we stayed like that for a long time, with nothing but small movements that were more language than drive. Now that I think about it, that afternoon was the most honest thing we had done in months. The month passed, as months do, slowly, quickly, all at once. When we met 4 weeks later, it wasn't to vote, it was to choose. Sophie said she couldn't live in two directions anymore. Thomas said he no longer wanted to be calm in a story that had a storm at its end. Freja and I looked at each other. We didn't choose each other that day, it would have been too easy to use each other as planks. We chose to leave the door ajar. Sophie moved home. She wrote to Thomas that she didn't want to see each other anymore. I saw her do it, my hand on her back. She didn't cry, she shook. I thought I would feel triumph, I felt responsibility. Now we're not going to lie about this decision, I said, we're going to live it. Coming back to each other after a breakup doesn't feel like hanging up a new lamp. It feels like putting a hand on an old stone and feeling that it's warm from the sun. We had our own rituals. Every Sunday morning we turned off our phones for 2 hours. We touched each other without purpose, just to remind the skin that it doesn't have to perform. I stood behind her in the kitchen, wrapping my arms around her stomach as she spread butter on bread, letting my mouth rest on the nape of her neck. She leaned back into me and said my name, not to bring me closer but to say I was there. Later, when we made love, it wasn't an argument but a place. There were nights when I woke up because she had grabbed my hand in her sleep and held it tightly as if she were falling. I held back. Freja didn't disappear. She came by one afternoon with a bowl she had made for us. For your salts, she said, when the world tastes too sweet. She ate with me and helped me harvest basil on the balcony. There was a moment when her hand brushed mine and we looked at each other and knew that we could still get into something if we wanted to. We didn't. Sometimes the purest form of closeness is to be the one who doesn't take, she said at the door. Thank you, I said, and I didn't mean the toast. I could write that everything was fine ever since. That would be a lie. A winter came when Sophie started walking with her shoulders higher than the windowsill again, and Thomas' name appeared in my throat even when she bought milk. We talked about it, not to hurt but to give it space. I think about him when I'm scared, she said. It's not a choice, it's a pattern. Then let's draw a new one, I said. We went to couples therapy a few times. Not because we were falling apart, but because we wanted to learn each other's new language. The most intimate night didn't happen in beds. It happened on the living room floor where we had spread a thick duvet and pillows, and Sophie said, "Do you want to see me, even the things I'm ashamed of?" "Yes," I said. She turned off most of the lights, leaving one on. She took off her clothes one piece at a time, but not as a performance. She did it as if she were putting down burdens, the stockings because they were tight, the bra because it hid her breathing, the pants because they had had too many pockets full of other people's things. She stood before me, pale in the way one only is when one is safe, and said, "I am not beautiful because I am not lying to you now." I went over, put my forehead against hers as I do when everything should be simple, and we stood like that for a long time before we lay down and let our bodies do the rest, slowly, gratefully. The months rolled by. My roasting business began to improve. People came to drink coffee and stay, some because they could feel that something had become true in the room. Sophie began to sleep through the night again. Her shoulders became lower, her smile less loud, more warm. We stopped letting the lock tell stories. Instead, we started letting the window tell them, who we invited in, what we did with the curtains open, what we meant by home. If you ask me if I regret letting Thomas set foot on my doorstep more than once, I say no, not because it was right, because it made us relentlessly aware of what we wanted to be. I learned that revenge can look like action but is often just a pause button for hearts that dare not return to the rhythm. I chose instead to become interesting to my own life again, to roast better, to love slower, to tell more truthfully. A final scene, late summer, the air thick with dust and the soft noise of bicycles. Sophie and I are sitting in the yard with candles in glass jars. Freja comes by from her garden with a bag of tomatoes that smell of the sun. She sits down, we share bread, olives, cheese. There is a moment when all three of us are silent at the same time, not because words are lacking but because they are not necessary. Sophie puts her hand over mine. Freja puts her hand over ours. We breathe. Nothing beautiful to write, really, and yet everything. Now when I get up in the morning and unlock the roastery, I hear the lock click and I don't think who, I think home. And every day when I pour the first beans into the grinder, I say softly, open. Not just to the smell of coffee, to all that we have decided to turn on instead of hide. To the truth, which is never pretty to begin with but which makes the hands clean. To the body that keeps praying when it is finally heard. To the night when the lock told everything, and to all the days since when we ourselves did.